Hey BookTube! My name is the Book Mage, welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be a wrap-up of all the books I read for spooky season, plus a couple of the books that I'd read just before that I hadn't wrapped up yet, so I think in total there are 9 books. So the first book I read was Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. This is the sequel to The Blade itself and is the second in Joe Abercrombie's first law series. And it had been a while since I read The Blade itself, so it took a tiny little bit of catching up, but like once I got into the story again, I was like so into it. I'm getting the feeling from reading these books that the first 3 books in this series could basically just be like one book because they feel so cohesive, and it's so hard for me to tell you anything that happens in these books without like giving major spoilers. So because this is the second book in a series, I'm not going to do that, but I think I rated this about 4 stars, which is the same as I gave to the first book. Put that behind my little pumpkin. Then after that, the next book I read was Small Angels by Lauren Owen. So this was one of my most anticipated books of the year, and without really spoiling it, it's kind of disappointing. Basically, Lauren Owen's debut is a book called The Quick, which is like Dickensian Victorian vampires and like secret societies, and it's just really good. This is more like small English town like folklore, and it's kind of light on the folklore. It's much more a story just about like the people involved. It's a very like personal sort of thing, and it takes a look at the lives of these 2 women as they sort of like meet and grow, and it sort of flicks between like the past and the future and how the Woodlands came to sort of be the way that they are and maybe why they're waking up again. So it was nowhere near as like dark or gothic or anything like that, so it's a fine book. It's fine, it was nowhere near what I wanted it to be. It's definitely not like a spooky season book. And yeah, to say that I was like so hype about this coming out, yeah, it did not live up to my expectations, but it's not to say that it's bad, it just was not what I was looking for. However, fret not, because the next book I read, oh my god. Yeah, because after that I picked up The Cuckoo by Leo Carew. So this is the 3rd book in the Under the Northern Sky series, and it is the finale, and it is a chonker. This book is huge, and I devoured this in a couple days because it's addictive. So I can't really tell you what happens in this book, but the first book is sort of like, it's set in like an alternate history sort of Britain. There's the humans that live in the south and a race of like taller warrior-like beings called the Anakim who live in the north, and there's this sort of like constant warring going on between them. It's a lot of battles, a lot of like bloody descriptions of combat, and there's also a lot of politicking and like trying to secure a throne and like make political alliances, but in a really good, super engaging, incredibly bingeable way. I can't spoil anything that happens for you in this book, obviously, but what I will say is, oh my god, did this book do things that before I picked it up I did not expect we would be going to these places. I can't say I'm glad we went there, but I appreciate the experience. Yeah, this book was an emotional roller coaster, to say the least. It definitely ended, it definitely finished. It gives me more of the impression of the way that you get historical books written where they're looking back over the past and things will end in a very, maybe a not very storybook, but a much more realistic sort of way, a way that makes sense for this story and this world and these characters. So I can have no complaints about the resolution, but damn. Yeah, I don't think it was quite a 5 stars. The series as a whole, I love. One of my favourite fantasy series of all time, and I will definitely reread it, even though it's quite light on the fantastical aspects. But yeah, maybe like a 4.5 stars or something. I'm very subjective, and like when I rate something a 5 stars, I just have to feel it. Like, I just know that a book is a 5-star book, and it didn't quite have that impact on me, but nonetheless, a fantastic book and a fantastic series, and I know I talk about it all the time, but if you have not read the Under the Northern Sky series, what are you doing? Go read it! Share my pain! Okay, and then after that I kicked off with my like spooky, seasonal, Halloween-y kind of books. Or at least I thought I did, because the next book I read was Babel by R.F. Kuang. And I will die on this hill, it is Babel. I did like a whole reading vlog of which this was like the main part because it took me so long to get through. Basically we're following a young boy or a young man called Robin. He was sort of stolen away from Canton in China by a very sort of intelligent and wealthy sort of like British, what would you call him? The kind of guy that thinks they're a philanthropist, but is actually just like, just a rich dude. And he's brought up in English society and is sent off to Babel, which is a part of Oxford University that deals with languages and silver working, because in this world, silver is basically magic. I don't really want to say much more than that, but the book does deal a lot with sort of race, identity, colonialism in the British Empire, and it goes into a lot of detail, and a lot of detail about language. The book does have footnotes, and it goes into a lot of detail about things like language and etymology, and I love etymology, so I did really enjoy those bits. However, and like this book, this comes with a big old asterisk. In a weird way, I feel like I would have enjoyed this so much more if it had been written as like an academic essay, because it's written as a fiction book. The medium through which this story is being told is as a story, as a fiction story, and I feel like in terms of like the story and the plot and the characters, I feel like that's where this book lets itself down just a little bit, because I feel like there was not a lot of sort of character depth or growth. I never at any point really felt like I knew these characters, and you spend the whole book with them, but it's like it sort of tells you that Robin has these friends and like all the things he knows about them, but because we have like massive time skips throughout this book, I feel like we don't get to know them enough. And at the same time, I do also feel like this could have been like 100 pages shorter, because there's a lot of preamble, and I did feel like this book kind of dragged. Robin as a character as well is also very passive. It's like anything that he does to progress the story is 9 times out of 10 a little bit like either accidental or not through any actual willpower of his own, and then the rest of the time he's just reacting, and that is apart from like some parts at the end. But for the majority of this story, there's not a whole lot in the way of like, there isn't really much of a character arc, and I almost wish we would have seen, I guess, more of a lot of Robin's internal struggles, or because we kind of live in his head, we get a lot of his thoughts, but at the same time I still don't really feel like I know him very well as a character, because it's very surface level, the things that we do know. So I feel like if this is going to be sort of like a statement put out through like a work of fiction, I just didn't really gel with it. Like the tone and the messages and the sort of themes at play here I think are really interesting, and one of the things that I said in the vlog while I was filming it is like, is all academia not just dark academia? If the thing that makes this dark academia is like the racism and the misogyny and like the colonialism, and it's like, yeah, all like modern academia is sort of built off of these things, but is all academia therefore dark academia? Because otherwise this didn't really feel that dark. And in fact the world here isn't really any different to our world, which is something that I found a bit weird. I would have liked things to be like slightly different, almost like a slightly like Twilight Zone sort of like I would have liked it if not everything was exactly the same, if like maybe the people in power were different. Just something about the world is a little bit different to make it feel a bit off kilter, because otherwise it's almost like there's no difference between these two worlds, in which case, once again, it is all academia, not just dark academia. Yeah, unfortunately, personally, I did not really enjoy this book. Like it's mostly well written, and I really did enjoy the language aspect of it, but otherwise I can't say I was a massive fan. So it is disappointing, because like this book is beautiful looking and I thought it would be like so dark and goth, and it never went there. So yeah, it's like I feel like giving it 3 stars because it's there's nothing really majorly wrong with it, but like my enjoyment of it is probably less than a lot of other books that I've given 3 stars, so make of that what you will. So after reading Babel, I was just not feeling like another big book. It took me a really long time to read Babel, so I wanted something small to get off my TBR to sort of like up the number of books that I'd completed. So I picked up Drowned Country by Emily Tesh. This is the second in the, I always forget, I think it's called like the Green Hollow duology. So this is a continuation and also the conclusion of the duology. It is super short, so that makes it exceptionally difficult to sort of say what this is about without getting into spoiler territory. So the first book follows kind of like a green man, man of the woods type mythos, and also a young man called Silver who comes to these woods and sort of meets this green man, this sort of like spirit, like this embodiment of the local woodland. Other than saying like things happen, I'm not quite sure where the spoilers would begin, but it is basically like a romance, a love story at heart. This book continues on a little while after the conclusion of the first book. Essentially it starts out sort of following on the trail of a potential vampire who has maybe claimed a victim on this like sort of coastal town, and I feel like this book was mainly just sort of wrapping things up from the end of the first novella. So I feel like the author wanted to get to a certain point at the end of this book. This is just like all the things that needed to happen to get the characters to that place and that point in time. And I do feel like the story was a little bit meandery and a little bit directionless, but then it is sort of folklore-y and it's very short, so it didn't really drag. It did not feel as cohesive as the first book, but it was fine. It's totally fine. It was a fun little novella. I like the conclusion. I did want to know what happened to the characters and the relationships and like how they left off and like what would they become, and I got to see that, which I appreciate. This was a nice like little palette cleanser, except for the fact that I had just read Babel and there is a character in this called Silver, and I did not like being reminded so much of Babel so soon. So yeah, after reading Babel I definitely needed like a pick-me-up in the way of something spooky and tacky and Halloweeny, and so I read My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix, and I really liked this book. I had such a good time reading this. This book is fun and bingeable and super predictable and super cliche, but still perfectly entertaining and honestly perfect for Halloween. It's like, it's a Halloween movie in book form. It's perfect. So this book is set in the 80s and it follows a girl called Abby as she starts to realise that after a night of skinny dipping and drugs gone wrong, that her best friend Gretchen is maybe acting a little bit weird, and I think we all know the reason why. So it's basically following Abby as she tries to figure out what's going on, come to terms with things, and it's her trying to sort of solve the situation. I just realised I forgot to stand up Drowned Country. So the book is full of like 80s pop culture references and like little nostalgia triggers, and I was not alive in the 80s. I hope you can tell that. And I don't even know a lot of like modern pop culture. It's not something that I'm particularly well versed in. So aside from recognising like a few song titles, a lot of the stuff in here, there's a lot about like brands and perfumes and like TV shows and all sorts of things that I don't get. But I think if you were alive in the 80s, or you just happen to know like more about, I don't know, 80s pop culture than me, you'll probably really enjoy all those little references. Either way, that aside, I had a great time reading this book. It took me like, I don't know, just like a day and a bit to finish because it was just so easily bingeable. Exactly like a cheesy Halloween, like, teen horror movie. Perfect for Halloween, and I'm so glad I picked this up. Rating-wise, I keep forgetting to rate these. Rating-wise, I'm thinking if I'm rating this for enjoyment, it's probably like a high 3 stars, like a 3.5 or something like that. It gets confusing when I bring decimals into this. The thing is, I know that there are definitely books that I've rated similarly that if I were to put these side by side, I would say objectively one book is better than the other. But like, take all my ratings with a pinch of salt. They're very spur of the moment. So yeah, I'm gonna give this like a high 3 stars, like a 3.5, 3.75 if you're feeling extra spicy. And I'm very sorry to cover up my Hellfire mug, but like, I need to put that there. Okay, so pretty much immediately after finishing My Best Friend's Exorcism, I decided that I really wanted to pick up another Grady Hendrix book, which was good for me because I put 2 of them on my October TBR. So the next book I read in October was We Sold Our Souls. And this book fills such a great niche for me because, like, first of all, look at the aesthetic of this book. I know I gushed about this when I hauled it, and also I can answer the question now that these runes on the front, I'm pretty sure these are lyrics to a song written by the main character, and while they're not spoilers, if you can read them, because you can read them, don't. Read them after you finish the book. I feel like they'll make more sense. That's my like top reader tip to you if you have this edition. So this book follows a woman named Chris, and she is the former guitarist of a 90s metal band called Dirtwork. The band has like long since split up and they never really got famous except for after they disbanded, for what are at the start of the book confusing reasons. Their singer went on to be like phenomenally impossibly famous. Think like Ozzy Osbourne level fame, but with the personality of Axl Rose. And you will see the issues here. So this book basically follows Chris as she tries to figure out what happened on the night that she signed this contract, the night the band disbanded, the night everything went wrong in her life. And she decides to go and seek out some of her old bandmates to sort of get to the bottom of just what she feels is maybe going on here. And right off the bat, one thing that I really liked about this book is the fact that the main character is 47 in the present day. There are some flashbacks to when they were like younger and in the band, but at the time you're reading it, she's 47. And it's so rare that, first of all, we get any older female characters, and like 47 isn't even that old. It's so rare that older women are allowed to exist, so like I really appreciate that. And also she's really kick-ass. I love her. Yeah, I'm super into like rock metal. They do kind of shit on new metal in this book, and like one of my favourite bands is Linkin Park, but like I'm letting it slide because like it was the 90s, I understand. So yeah, the main thing that I enjoyed about this book was just all the metal references. Like when they're talking shit about Slipknot and Korn, it's like, look, I love that kind of thing. Again, they're two bands that I like, but I will also talk a lot of shit about Slipknot. I'm really hoping to see them next year, but also I will still talk shit about them. So this book was super fun for me, and I did just really enjoy reading it. I didn't get through it quite as quickly as the last Grady Hendrix book. I do feel it wasn't quite that bingeable, and it was less sort of like spooky and less Halloweeny than I thought it would be. It did feed like my metalhead soul, and I feel like if I went looking for another book about like metal or music, it would be too set in like, I don't know, the real world. It would be too realistic, and I like the, I guess, fantastical aspects of this book that really made it much more fun for me. I will say my only kind of gripe with this is the ending, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but I feel like there were things set up and there were like stakes raised quite high, in fact, that never exactly got addressed. I don't know, it feels like there could totally be a sequel at some point. Like it feels very open-ended to the point where it's like, yeah, there's a lot that hasn't been addressed. Like there was this finale, and then it's like, okay, but what are the repercussions of this? Ultimately though, I did really enjoy it. I have recommended this to a few people, and I will say if you like metal and like alternative music, it's worth reading it just for like little nods and references and like little asides and digs and things. Like it's definitely enjoyable. Also, the lineup for the fictional festival in this, I would totally have gone to that. I would totally have bought tickets. Yeah, that's the good thing about putting this here. The stack comes in handy. And again, I forgot to rate it. I would say I probably gave this like a 3 point something. This one, honestly, great. But this one was just exactly what I wanted at the right time. So I obviously appreciated that a lot more in the moment. And then everything from this point onwards is actually comics. So I read 2 comics to round out the month. Although I suppose they'd probably be called graphic novels, but we're splitting hairs here. So the first one I read was Claudia's Story by Anne Rice, and this is illustrated by Ashley Marie Witter. And the illustrations in this are really lovely, and yeah, the art style is lovely, and this basically follows a character from the Interview with the Vampire novel. Interview with the Vampire is told from the perspective of a man called Louis who has turned into a vampire, and part way through Interview with the Vampire there is another character introduced, and her name is Claudia. So she is a vampire who is also a child and therefore cannot age. This comic is therefore told from her perspective. It basically follows the exact same plot. It's very, very true to the book. There are even some like almost direct quotations when it's like dialogue, but it just sort of reframes things from Claudia's perspective, so you get to see a little bit more about her character, her personality. I think if you really like the Vampire Chronicles, then it's a really rewarding read because it's so quick and it's really atmospheric. The artwork is lovely, it's wonderful, and it's nice to just see the story realised through a different medium. Okay, and the last thing that I read in October, which I can't stand up behind me, so it's a good thing it's the last one on the list, and that is the Holy Diver graphic novel, which is the graphic novelization of the song Holy Diver by Dio. So this is just a very, very short little sort of comic. It's very old school in the artwork. I would love to show you a page, but there are so many titties in here. Like every page, just nipples for days. Oh, I can show you this page. The art style is quite nice because you get lovely big dragons. So yeah, this is what I mean by the art style. It's very, could you say retro? I do like that though because it has the same sort of vibes as like the sort of artwork from this era that would accompany sort of metal albums and things. I think it's very in keeping stylistically with like what I expected. So yeah, this kind of, it puts like a sort of tenuous sort of story together that sort of follows kind of the plot of the song Holy Diver by Dio, to the point where you will, like, every time there was like a direct line from the song as someone's dialogue, I was like hearing it sung, which maybe didn't help for my immersion in this world, but honestly it was like a nice little aside. I did appreciate the dragon. It was fun to read. I don't know whether I would recommend it unless you just really like the song and want to see it sort of reinterpreted in a different way by several artists. I still think I like the music video better because, like, how could you not? I didn't really like love it. I don't think it's anything super special to write home about. Am I technically doing that because like I'm speaking about it at length on this channel? I feel like that's actually doing more than writing home about something. So, bad turn of phrase on my part, but I think you get what I'm saying. I would really only recommend this if you just really like Dio. And I feel like I almost didn't need to say that because is anyone even here still listening if you don't already like Dio? He's one of my favourite artists, so like, that's why I have this. Or I have made an attempt. I've made an attempt to stack it with some of my fairy loot boxes, so we'll see if that lasts. Yeah, so that was it. That was my October wrap up, and I guess also like the tail end of September. I feel like this is a pretty good, pretty decent amount of books and a pretty diverse sort of like selection of books, at least for me and my little fantasy adult brain. Especially considering I have not really been reading very much at all recently. Like, I'm pretty sure Before They Were Hanged is the first book I read all year. So to say this is where I'm at now, I'm putting in some effort, but I'm enjoying it. So yeah, I think I had a really good reading month and a half. So do let me know if you guys have read any of these books, if you enjoyed them, or if you're maybe thinking of picking them up. I'm most interested to know if anybody here has read The Cuckoo and what you thought of it. But honestly, tell me about any of these books if you've read them or if you're planning to. So with that said, I think that is it from me for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and if you did, and if you made it this far, leave me a little pumpkin emoji or a jack-o'-lantern emoji. Also, can we please just appreciate how small and cute this pumpkin is? It is so small. I just want to immortalize it because, like, it's gonna rot in a few days. Which, you know, ultimately isn't that like a very goth thing to watch something you love wither and die? Okay, so with that said, thank you guys so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next video. Bye!